Hello, everyone. I'm Kagan McFadden, the past board president of the Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to Beyond the Page, Redefining the Modern Writer's Journey, curated and moderated by Chelene Knight and featuring authors Helen Knott, Sookfong Lee, and Christina Myers. Though this is a virtual event, Victoria Festival of Authors is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and we give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We remain committed to serving as learners and as listeners. Thank you to our funders, the sponsors, thank you to our funders and sponsors, the Canada Council for the Arts, BC Arts Council, and the Province of British Columbia, the CRD, the City of Victoria, the Victoria Foundation, Access Copyright, and Munro's Books. This event, as all VFA events, offers closed captioning. Please click the double C at the bottom of your screen to view the captions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions for us or for the authors during the event. The moderator will be able to get to some of those questions at the end of the panel. This panel is moderated by Chelene Knight. Not only is Chelene the author of 4 books, she is also the founder of her own coaching studio, Breathing Space Creative, through which she's launched the Thrive Coaching Program for busy professionals. Hi, Chelene.
Hi, Keegan. Thanks so much for the beautiful introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of you to my amazing panelists. So Helen Knott is a Dainza, Nahio, Métis, and mixed Euro descent woman from Prophet River First Nations and lives in Fort St. John, BC. Her memoir, Becoming a Matriarch, which I have beside me right here, was shortlisted for the 2024 Hubert Evans Nonfiction Prize and co-won the 2024 Georgia Riga Award for Social Awareness in Literature. So welcome, Helen. And I first met Helen while we were working together on some writerly things, and I tell you, I've been in awe ever since. So welcome, Helen. Next up, we have Jen Sookfong Lee, a Vancouver-born writer, is known for her books such as Superfan. Hello, have that right here as well. Beautiful book, love it. Named Best Book of 2023 by the Globe and Mail and Apple Books. The Conjoined, a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. The Shadow List and Finding Home. She is also an editor and co-hosts the literary podcast Can't Lit, which I love. And I think I've known you, Jen, for 10 years now, which seems wild to me. And Jen was one of my first fiction mentors and definitely contributed to me writing my very first novel. And I'm working on another novel now. And every time I second guess myself, I just channel my inner Jen. What would Jen say? So I'm feeling like I'm in a good spot. So welcome, Jen. And we also have Christina Myers. Christina Myers is a former journalist and the author of Halfway Home. Love this. This took me on a journey reading this book. Thoughts from Midlife with House of Anansi 2024. The List of Last Chances is with Caitlin Press 2021, which was longlisted for the Leacock Medal. She is a member of the Danakta First Nation and lives in Surrey, BC. So funny story about how Christina and I kind of connected. We both share the same fear of driving behind one of those logging trucks. And we have this image in our brain that like, what if those logs unhinge themselves and suddenly find them inside of our windshield? So weird connecting thread, but that's how Christina and I connected. So me, I'm Chelene Knight, author of a few books, most recently Let It Go, Free Yourself from Old Beliefs and Find a New Path to Joy. So I've been following all of these writers closely. And whether that's through reading their books, attending events, or just kind of sending them a random email. One thing that really stood out to me is that we are all balancing creativity and being in this wild west of writing and publishing, all while parenting and while trying to find and prioritize our own space for well-being. So being a working writer today involves so much more than just writing. We're constantly navigating complex emotions and making decisions every step of the way. So that's why this session is going to be a little bit different. So instead of focusing solely on your books, please go buy them, by the way. We'll dive into how we've intentionally created the space to write them. So, this is an opportunity for us to talk about some of the things we don't often get space to discuss. So, let's go ahead and just get into it. I want to start things off with something nice and simple and light. So, you all have multiple books under your belts. What did you learn, or what are you learning about yourselves, not only through the writing of your recent book, but through the promotion of your book? What are you learning, or what have you learned about yourselves? And I'll start with you, Helen.
Yeah, I think for like the writing of the book is just I remember someone asking like, aren't you, and this was during my second one, writing my second one, aren't you worried that you're not going to finish? And I was like, no, like future me is like has already written the book and she's just chilling. So like I'm
Mm,
not doing myself any service if I'm like in a state of stress. And so now it just is kind of like, okay, I know how to do this. I can write a book. It's not this untangible thing. So I don't have a lot of like stress around bringing it into the world. Obviously, um, over time, finding out what works best for me in terms of like a writing practice. What does that look like? Being able to create and guard space for that.
mm,
And my son, because I was like, I want to go away. And he's 16 and tired of sharing being with the world. And I was like, I want to go away and go and write. And he's like, why don't you just pull a Maya Angelou? And I was like, I don't want to. Because I did that before where like you just like rented a hotel room and you went there during the day and wrote and then came back home. And so he's like, just do that, just do that. And so learning about how to guard that time, which I'm not always the best at. And then in terms of like promotion, I think I learned last time with the schedule in terms of like literary festivals, because like you're at one right now, right? You're participating in one. All of the events happen really close in the fall. And so you're traveling kind of like back and forth if you get to go to multiple festivals. And I learned by the end of it, by like Waterloo, where I had a breakdown, to like be a little kinder to myself in terms of what I say yes to and what I say no to, and how much time I need in between, but also like just easy things to streamline it in terms of like how I pack. Like I have packing cubes,
yes.
like the medicines that I take, the teas, the comfort items, what are my like non-negotiables when you're traveling lots. So I think that's what I learned.
That's amazing. That's beautiful. And I heard so much of myself in that answer, like not to be a nerd, but I have like a packing list printout thing. And it's like right beside me because like you said, sometimes it's just these small things that we can kind of take care of, right? Free up space in the brain. And the more we can do that, hey, the more we can be present and be here talking about our books. So I love that. Thank you, Helen. What about you, Jen? What have you learned about yourself promoting your last book?
Um, I've learned that I hate traveling for work. Once I get to a place, I'm good. Like I love events, I love media, I love all that stuff. But the traveling I find really stressful. Like if you're a parent, and particularly if you're a mom, that is a really difficult thing to organize with your kid, with the if you have co-parents, whatever it is. It's really daunting. And like this fall, I'm not traveling at all. And I'm like, oh my
Mm,
God, am I not traveling for like the next 6 months? Amazing. And I'm really, really happy with that. The other thing I think I've learned is that with all of my books up until and including Superfan, I felt really like motivated to write them. I felt like a driving need to write them. And I don't have that anymore. Which is not to say I'm not writing. I'm 100% writing. But it's such a curious thing. Like I realized I woke up one morning and I said, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, am I happy with the books that I've written? I'm not saying I'm happy with the rest of my life. The rest of my life is a mess. But am I happy with the books that I wrote? And I'm like, yeah, I'm happy. So everything from this point on is gravy. And I highly recommend the lack of stress from that driving need to write something. That's
mm.
actually quite stressful. Being in a space where you're just writing something because it's a lot of fun is much better.
I like that. Writing from a place of just enjoyment.
Hmm.
I love it. I love it. Thanks, Jen. And what about you, Christina?
Yeah, I think what I've learned in the last couple of years with the last few projects is a lot of wrestling with a lot of messy internal stuff around I hate the term and I hate that it's coming out of my mouth and I'm almost 50, but dealing with a lot of that imposter syndrome stuff and really coming to terms with the fact that there's enough people out in the world that might second guess me. Do I need to keep second guessing myself at the same time? And along with that has come getting better at feeling confidence around which voices and opinions to absorb and carry with me and which ones to let go of. And that's been really hard because for I think a lot of my life, I've probably prioritized everybody's voice. Every single opinion that's incoming must be important and I should absorb it and refer to it and make decisions based on that. And so to come to a place in my life again, which feels so late, but better late than never, I guess, where I can say that is an opinion I can just disregard. That's a person I can disregard. What do I think about this? That's been really huge. And I think the other thing I've really learned is also that another thing I wish I had learned years ago, that what's for me will be for me. We were just talking about, the fall festival season, and there was several festivals that I was sort of hoping I'd be part of with the book coming out in the spring. And I wasn't. And there was sort of this moment of like, yeah, second guessing myself, and maybe the book isn't what I thought it was, and people aren't interested in it. And then having to just say, what's for me will come for me, and what isn't won't, and just be cool with that. Because something else is going to come that you're going to be, I'm so glad I'm available when this is happening, this other thing that has come for me. So yeah, a lot of really messy internal stuff has come out of the last couple of years with these projects, which is good. I mean, that applies to other parts of my life too, aside from my career. So yeah.
And it's growth, right? Like that imposter syndrome and kind of watching what everyone else is doing and then thinking, well, I didn't get to go to that, or how come
Yeah.
I did? Like my last book was very quiet. Like I didn't travel very much, and that's exactly what I needed. Like I needed to just be with myself and just rest and think and plan. And like Jen said, I want to have some fun working on something new, And I think what often happens, especially when you have multiple books, is that you might feel that imposter syndrome, and it might be for like 20 minutes, right? But, first book, it might have been for a month where you're like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And that time shrinks. And I think that's valuable to look at how, you grow and you evolve as a creative. So I love that. I think that's awesome. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for sharing that. So this kind of brings us lovingly into my next question. Christina, I love seeing your beautiful Instagram post that you put up recently where you shared your writing space,
Oh,
the space that you created for yourself. I really like that because it's a great reminder that, this work that we are doing, it is not all about the glitz and the glamour and the fanciest spaces and this. If you have that, that's great. But that is not what makes us writers. So I think we often have to get creative with what we have. So I'm curious, I'm very, very curious. What's one common misconception non-writers have about the writing life that you would like to debunk here today on this panel? Christina, I'm starting with you.
you're gonna start with me? All right. Well, if I
Yes.
swivel up, maybe one misconception is that we all have ceilings in our offices. I'm way down here in
We
my
don't need ceilings.
my my basement in my ancient house. A misconception, I think a big misconception right off the top that comes to me is how much support or financing there is for various things. So I think that people think that every book that comes out from every publisher, regardless of the size of that publisher, that you're kind of whining and dining across the country and going to all of these events. And there's like, there's going to be catering and an open bar at every single launch. And the amount of sort of hustle and investment and sacrifice that goes into making those things happen. And I think actually there was a newsletter this month from the Writers Union of Canada. Danny had sent a newsletter, sort of a monthly check-in. And I think there was a reference to that exact thing, how he, was going to all these awards and he was going to all these events and he looked great and he's flying here and there, but he's like, how many more pennies are in my bank account, right? Because he's funding a lot of that himself. So I find that is a big thing where sort of people go like, ooh, la-di-da, where are you off to next? And oh, must be nice to have sort of, and you're like, no, that's not really how it works, right? So that's, for me, I think that's probably a big one that I would say. And yeah, having fancy ceilings in your office.
We don't all have ceilings and we're not all going to fancy dinners with Danny. And yeah, I saw that letter that came out, and I thought that was such a beautiful share, and like those are the kinds of conversations I think that we need to be having, because really that is how we change that kind of cliched image of what it looks like to be a writer. You see the writer on TV typing away on some typewriter and their manuscript is just done, and then someone just magically buys it and then everything's amazing. I'm like, where are your groceries? Like, where are these things coming from? So I think talking about the realities of what it looks like and feels like to be a writer, so valuable. Thank you for that. What about you, Jen? What misconception are you here to debunk?
Well, I think, I've had, I don't know, 11 books or something published. And I think that people really think, like I have all these visible markers of success that are like publishing success, and it seems like I'm doing real great. But like the fact of the matter is, like when I grew up with these girls. I really like hanging out with smart women. Okay. So these girls that I grew up with, they all own like really nice houses, and they have jobs that are really impressive. And like one of them's a doctor, one's an engineer, and one of them is a human rights lawyer. Like I'm not even joking. And it's because when we were teenagers, we were all really smart, really mouthy, a certain type of girl. And I certainly have published books and done what I've said I was going to do, but I live in this tiny little townhouse with my kid, and I can't afford to renovate the kitchen, and I can't, I don't have a fancy car, I don't have anything. Listen, I drive a moto, okay, that's what I do, and I think that sometimes, when I'm going through promoting a book, it feels like people expect a certain amount of like celebrity trappings. But the fact of the
Mhm.
matter is my life is not that at all. And I just want people to know that, and that it's very I'm not rich. I still have to like look forward to, 1/4 of my advance payment, which is going to be obliterated by my mortgage, like all of these things. And yeah, just there's not a lot going on here other than the books.
Mhm. Mhm. What about you, Helen?
I think mine would be like, I hear both what Christina and Jen had said. I agree with those both. And then I think mine is like that misconception where it'd be like, oh, it'd be really cool if we had this like author over for dinner and then they can just like razzle dazzle us with stories. And I'm socially awkward. And then they think it's going to be like this amazing thing. And then I show up and I'm like, a little shy. Like, you put me on a stage, sure, like I can do well, I can tell stories, but it's like the equivalent of like having a comedian over and being like, hey, tell me a joke. And like, but maybe the comedian's actually funny and I'm just awkward at the dinner table. And people are like, oh, well, that was like maybe a little bit underwhelming, depending on how I am that day in social situations. But I think that is probably like the biggest misconception. Aside from, I don't know if people that I met really like today, even someone was like, oh wow, that must be like really rewarding and to live that creative life. And I was like, I think, yeah, definitely it is, but you don't also see how isolating, right? It is when you're involved in creative pursuits and you're kind of like living in this like silo in terms of like, especially because I live in the north, so there's not a creative community that I can plug into. So it's usually just like me at my kitchen table, sometimes in the other room when it's not so messy with other things, because I also get ready in that room. But yeah, so I think those are the two things.
Can I just
Super
add a
interesting.
little bit?
Yeah,
Because
please
I
do.
once was invited to a fundraiser for a festival, and they put one author at each table with like the corporate donors and sponsors, and nobody there knew who I was because like they worked for a bank or something. I don't even remember where they worked, and they just bought the table, right? So then they turned to me, so like, what do you do? What are you going to say to us tonight? What do you? And I'm like, I just want to eat this chicken and go home. Like I came here for the free food.
Yeah.
They it was the most awkward. I don't know how much money they paid for that table. I don't think I was very entertaining. That's all.
Wow, that would not be a situation where I would thrive. Just gonna say, you're gonna sit at a table alone with me. Hope you brought your phone and something to do. Very interesting. I think for me, when it comes to these misconceptions about what does it look like or feel like to be a writer? One thing that really just kind of, I think we need to talk about more is just the writing process in general. Like, what does it take to actually create these books? And so for me, I love unstructured play. I love mind mapping and brainstorming and dipping my toes into research and doing all of that stuff that has to happen before we even get to the drafting. But I have so many conversations with non-writers who think, well, you're just typing some words, so what's taking you so long? I'm like, oh, there's so much involved. I want to have some fun too. Hello. So yeah, it's interesting out there. But one thing I've also been thinking about, especially in the fall, because it's busy with festivals and award season and all kinds of things, is about comparison. And we're all out there watching each other, even if we say we aren't watching each other. And while we definitely want to celebrate our peers' achievements, it can be tough to stay focused on our own path. So, what are some ways that you personally stay aligned with your own creative goals? Maybe I'll start with you, Jen.
Um, it's a really great question because I don't think there's no way you can have the publishing industry is set up for us to compete with each other, with awards, with publishing contracts, with all of those things. And it's really one of the least nice things about it. I actually quite loathe it. And I think there's no way for us to not compare ourselves to others. But what I think has really helped me over these years is to um, really remember what I want to do. Like what are the stories I want to tell? And so, for example, for me, a lot of it has to do with mother-daughter stuff, intergenerational trauma, usually migration, that kind of stuff, motherhood. I've basically been writing about my mother my entire life. If you look at all my books, they're mostly about my mom, but but also like making sure that I'm writing stories that are I feel a lot of emotional connection with, that were previously untold. So that's my thing. But I also think, and I think that I think that I'm the one to do what it is that I'm doing. But
Mm.
in terms of like comparison, I think that um, years ago, I decided that when somebody I know does really well, that success reverberates to everybody, right? Like one of my writing partners once said, like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Which is like a cliche, but it's also true. Like if a friend of mine, let's just say, gets a six-figure publishing deal for two books, that's really exciting for her or him or whoever. It's really exciting for them to have that money, to have the time and space to create, but it also makes me feel hopeful. It also helps other authors see what is possible. So all of those things, just a little mind shift in that sense, that like celebrating somebody else's success means that it could also provide hope or benefits or lovely things for everybody. And that really helps. Obviously, there are people that are my enemies and I don't care if they do well, but like, that's different. That's not the question.
There's always space to talk about the enemies or the frenemies. But, I like that because I think the community aspect is a really important consideration, right? Something happens to someone in community. How do we celebrate them while also celebrating our own path? And one thing that I've noticed for myself is like possibility is what has made me start to feel really excited about where I am, just because moving out of the scarcity mindset into abundance. Like there is space for us to tell these stories and to tell these stories in a way that only we can. Like, hello, we're all writing, mother-daughter stories, or we're all writing about belonging and all these different, the themes are the same, but it is our unique approach to the page that makes it, our own. And I always try to remind myself of that. It's like, come on, Chelene, channel your inner poet and bring that to the page as well. That's what makes these stories so interesting. So yeah, comparison. What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, I would piggyback quite a bit on what Jen just said. I think one of the things that works really well for me is having that sense of community. I definitely really struggle with that sort of piece of like online promotion and being on Instagram and talking about your own stuff. What I don't struggle with at all is cheerleading other people. I find that really easy to get onto Instagram and post somebody else's project or a success or whatever. And somehow for me doing that also, yeah, it reverberates back to myself as a hopefulness, right? It makes me feel like I'm part of sort of this community of collective cheerleading. And it feels good. It feels good to boost other people up. And so I think that's a big thing that I think about in terms of comparison. Sometimes it's a practical thing of just stepping away. Like social media is the highlight reel. It's the agent that's been acquired or the book deal. And you don't see the 7,000 tweets that could have been all the sucky stuff that led up to it, right? So sometimes it's just a matter of stepping away from the highlight reel because you know that's not the whole picture. And thinking about it is going to make you feel kind of weird and compare-y and that kind of thing. And a thing that I go back to over and over again, and I wish I could remember what he said. This was during a session with Wade Compton at SFU, and there was a group of us writers, and I wish I could remember what he said, but the outcome of what he said was basically how I have summarized in my head is this is not a Porsche. There isn't room for two of us and maybe a package behind the seat. This is a yellow school bus. There's room for everybody. And the stop is coming. It's up the road. And so when I get that feeling, I think yellow school bus, right? It's coming. It's coming at a different time for different people. And there's somebody out there who's maybe looking at the things that I've done and comparing and going, oh, how did that happen for her? And not seeing the behind the scenes and feeling weird about my things, right? So I try to keep all of that in mind when it comes to comparison.
One big yellow school bus. There's space for everyone. I like it. Helen, what are your thoughts on this comparison topic?
I recently like talking with this person. They won like a writing award. It was like screenwriting, and their event looked really cool. It looked like flashy, like celebrity status kind of thing. And I was like, dang, like you're a big deal because here, like those anyways, but I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I was like, you're a big deal. And they're like, no, I'd be a big deal. Like I'll be a big deal once I get like what is that? Like get a like published. I'll get a book deal. Then I'll be like a big deal. And I was like, I was like, you don't feel like a big deal after you get a book deal either. And I was like, so I don't know. And I was like, that's interesting because I was looking at you thinking like, wow, look at that. And that person was like, hey man, like you got book deals. Like that's really cool. That's my equivalent. And thinking about even just me before and what I had seen as a big deal. So I think we're all kind of like looking at each other, and even if we don't say it and being like, wow, that person's doing really amazing. And just, I don't, whether it's silently, like even when we hopped on, I direct messaged Jen and I was like, hey, you're a rock star. We haven't met before. Because you're always like watching people. And I've always, it's always good to be able to give that praise when you can to people as well, just to like lift people up, especially because like, and I try to all the time, but I am socially awkward, so sometimes it can be like weird. But trying to do that. And I was talking with one of my girlfriends who was like, well, I'm a little bit worried about posting about like my new love because you don't know how people are. Like if you find it, like there's jealousy and weird stuff. And I was like, I love love. And like if you're showing us that that's a possibility because we're like us like single ones, that's a possibility. That's amazing. And I was like, that's what I love. And that is what Jen was saying too, in terms of like, it shows you what can be possible. I think it was Katya Lafferty. She just got a 6-figure book deal, which was like amazing. It was that moment of like, yes, like we're out here doing these things and I can see possibility when doors open for other people. And that makes me really excited. And I think in terms of like the comparison and just staying in my creative processes, that I also don't read things that are in the genre that I want to write, which I don't know if that's like people do that. Like if you're like, I want to write this genre, so then I would like read everything in it. For me, I'm like, I'm gonna just stay away from that because I don't want to compare myself. And I will, like if I start reading other things, like I'm writing my first fiction right now, and it's gonna be a travel romance, or it is a travel romance. And so there's books that I'm like, ooh, I really want to read that. But I'm like, no, you'll read that after you're done writing your manuscript. You're going to read that later. So ways of like safeguarding my own sanity, because I don't want to fall into that trap of like, okay, so, but look what they're doing. Look how they're doing it. And yeah, so finding out what you need to do. And maybe for other people, it's like, I need to read all of these things. And that helps me in my own creative process. I don't know.
And we're all unique creatives. I think that's one way to look at it as well. We all kind of carve our own paths for ourselves, and it's all good. But I think thinking about comparison and all these misconceptions and all of that, and creating the creative process, all of that takes energy. And if you folks know me, I'm always talking about energy as currency. Like, I'm going to get a sweater that says that energy is currency. I dare you to challenge me on this. So, because of that, I want to talk a little bit about how you folks kind of protect your energy, or how do you plan in advance when it comes to, you've got a book coming out, energy is currency. What are some strategies that you use to kind of manage or protect your energy? And whoever wants to go first, why am I telling you who should go first? Let's see who unmutes first. If no one unmutes, then I have to talk.
Sure, I'll
Yay.
jump in. Yeah, protecting your energy. That's still, as you know, we've talked about this, a work in progress for me. Some of that being rooted in that sense of when you first sort of start working in this industry. I think there's a sense of sort of like, I have to sort of say yes to everything. I have to be grateful. I have to express that I'm grateful for these opportunities. And if I say no to things, then someone will think I'm not grateful, or that opportunity won't come around again, or the universe won't offer it to me again, or like all of those sort of thoughts. So for me, this is still very much a work in progress. So some of my answers are like things that I'm still figuring out. But yeah, coming to be really honest with myself about what I can say yes and no to, and how I say yes and no. So I might be getting better at saying that doesn't work for me, but then I feel like I have to justify that and explain it, and be very sort of gracious. And I mean, I always want to be gracious, but that I have to sort of express how deeply grateful I am, but it doesn't work for me right now. And being able to just sort of stand in my own kind of, I just can't do that. That doesn't, and that I don't have to give everybody an explanation for that. So that's a big one for me, is sort of coming to terms with how to say no, um, and how to juggle the favors, the creative favors that happen so often when you're a writer, like, when it's acquaintances or sometimes just strangers that reach out and have can you just take a quick peek at this? Can you give me some feedback on this? Can you do this? Can you give me a quick edit? Can you introduce me to your publisher or your agent, right? And so wrestling with all of those incoming requests, again, wanting to be sort of grateful and helpful and community minded, and then juggling how you sort of say no. So I've lost track a little bit of what my original answer was here, but yeah, it is a work in progress to sort of recognize that I can't say yes to everything, that I can't do everything, and that when that energy burns out, what that means is that I'm shortchanged, my writing is shortchanged, my family is shortchanged. It's like, the last person I want to shortchange is the stranger who's asked me for a favor, but I'll shortchange all these other parts of my life. And so just getting to be realistic with myself about that. But it's absolutely the learning curve that I'm still on, in writing and in so many ways. So yeah.
I think that's the most important part of that, is it's a work in progress, and there's never really like an end result, to any of this work. Because one thing that I think about when I say no is like, well, can I realistically make space for this right now? And if I have to say no, I don't want to say no with a 47 paragraph email. I want to say, no, I can't prioritize this, but also, here's an idea that I have for the future if you want to check back with me next season. And also, here's another writer who I'm kind of watching. You might want to call them in. So I think that kind of helps too with the guilt and the anxiety, when you can call in another writer and say, put the spotlight on this person here. So I think there's some fun ways to say no as well, because energy, it's a thing like that. I'm getting older now too, mid 40s, thinking like, whoa. I remember when I could stay out all night at a literary event and chat to everyone. Now I'm like 3 p.m. I'm still awake right now. This is something. But yeah, what else are we thinking by way of energy, Jen?
I just when I'm looking at events, there are ways of establishing what the value is, and it's like return on investment, right? Like if I put this much time, and it's not just the time of the event, it's the time to prepare for the event, it's the time you spend doing your hair for the event, like all of these things are make up what you do. It's like if you have to make dinner early for your kids so you can go out, all of that. And for me, if the return on investment isn't high enough, it's not happening. There are the value has to be high enough for me to sacrifice time with my kid, or sacrifice time with my partner, or sacrifice time with my sisters and my mom, who are really important to me, and my friends, right? I don't want to ever deprioritize my friendships, which are really, really important to me. So there's that. And there are some opportunities that are so fabulous, that have so much going on for it, that you will move heaven and earth to get there. And those are the wonderful ones. But when you're looking at sort of how something fits into your life, you really have to think about everything else you're doing in that week too. Like, and I don't mean just that day. It's also, for me, it's a weekly thing. I cannot be doing 3 events in a week. That's
Mm.
bonkers. Like, that is
Mm.
not going to happen. So yeah, it's all of that. Just determining what the value is for you, and whether that's worth it for all the time that you're going to spend before, after, and during.
That was one of the biggest things that I learned, I think, the hard way. Like, I remember almost 10 years ago, I think I was asked to do a workshop, and like what they were going to pay me, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that workshop. But I didn't think, okay, Chelene, you have to build this entire thing out. And not only that, you have to deliver it 5 times each day. You're like back to back. And then after that, like, this is this even your audience? Like, this is a group of like tweens. You're not entertaining. Okay. So think about your energy levels. So looking back at that, I'm like, one, I wouldn't do that again. But two, the amount of time and energy that it takes to curate something and then to show up in the way that you want to show up. You don't want to show up exhausted or a shell of yourself. So it's all those practical things that we have to think about. So again, those things really help me at the back of my mind. If I have to say no, I'm like, well, I know the value of this no right now. So yeah, thanks, Jen. Helen, I'm very curious to know what you have to say about energy.
Yeah, what you just said about tweens, like I remember I did like a grade 9 poetry workshop, and this was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And when I walked out of there, I was like, I'm never doing that again. And I have refused every school, high school offer since then, because I was like, and I've done youth work, like I've done a lot of facilitation. I'm helping my community build like a youth council right now. But I was like, that's just one thing I'm not gonna do. Like I refuse. And plus, like you think about that ROI that Jen was talking about, because there's a lot of prep that goes into things. And so there's things where I'm like, I did that, I went to the high school and did my time like with their poetry group before. But really understanding how I want to show up in the world and aligning and saying yes to opportunities that allow me to express that. So when I'm having conversations with people that are like, hey, we want you to come to this event, da da da, I've done a lot of work like in like an academic sense, but other things around like land and body violence. And then there's a period of time or a shift where I was like, I'm not showing up and talking about violence that Indigenous women experience anymore. I want to talk about the healing aspect or these other things. And these are the things that I will talk about. I also don't, someone who writes memoir, like I won't show up and tell my story. Like I'm not going through that. I'm like, you buy the book. Or we'll talk about like, I can tell stories from it, but we're not doing an A to B like linear fashion where I'm sharing my story. So having hard and fast rules that protect me, protect my own peace, protect even just in terms of, I think of like the energy in a room and what I want to leave people feeling like, because I think the feeling is so important too. So just ensuring that things align and being okay with saying no if it's too soon, if there's too fast of a turnaround, if I don't have time, if like sometimes like someone invited me to something recently and because I've been gone quite a bit too, I was like, oh, I won't be back in time to drive my son to school that day. Like I don't want to because my dad's been giving him rides. So I was like, I want to be able to be here. And I think that's important. One time you had posted, Chelene, about how you, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was something about like you haven't answered a work email on the weekend in years. And that blew
I
my
haven't sent an email from my phone
oh
in like 2 years or something like that. That's
yeah,
probably
and
what
that
it
blew my
was.
mind because it makes me think about like how I believe people deserve immediate access to me, no matter where I am in the world. And I still think of that because I still send emails from my phone, but that is still something that I'm like, okay, well, Chelene does this. Like, how how can I reduce that access to me, because that doesn't need to be immediate, right? I think that's
Mhm.
a big thing that I'm learning right now.
Yeah. And it's a game changer too. Like some smaller things that I do is I have in my email signature like 48 hours. Even if I see that email, I'm not going to respond until it's time for me to respond. And I think that also connects to that fear of missing out, where it's like, if I don't reply right now, this person is never going to invite me again. And that's what my mindset used to be like. And now I'm like, if that person has that mindset and they expect an immediate response from me, chances are this was not an aligned collaboration anyway. So, it's fine. It's fine. But all this talk about currency, I think that's a beautiful segue into the conversation about money, because we got to talk about money. Money is a thing. I think advances and royalties, these things are great and they are helpful and they are a part of being a published author. But I believe that having a book in the world can serve as a catalyst for a wide range of income generating opportunities, especially when we understand who we are as writers and the core message that we want to share as human beings. So I'm very curious, what are some creative ways you've explored to generate income from having a book in the world? I have lots to say on this, so I'm just gonna be quiet. So who would like to go first? Just unmute.
I think one of the things that I've learned is to just allow yourself to be curious, to be like, okay, well, could this work in terms of an avenue of making additional income or passive income? And then sometimes you're like, no, that did not work. Like, that was not something. Like, I think I was trying to put together a course earlier this year and it was something completely different. And I was like, this is not going to work. And I had to step back and just the timing was not right. And now I'm grateful that it didn't work. But also, I think we just take ourselves so seriously that it stops us from trying all these different things and really approaching it. I remember someone saying that, like, you want to sell or they were talking about book proposals and like, because it's a business. And I hadn't thought about it like that for the first while, because I was like, this is just my passion. Like, I really want to write. But then it's like I chose social work as my other career. So I'm like, neither of these make money really. So how do I make it so that make it make sense, like actual sense in the bank? And trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think, being able to combine those two things. I've done some online workshops. I think that started with an organization that asked me to do like writing workshops through them, a memoir one, and then being like, oh, well, I could do this on my own too. What does that look like? How do I host? And one of my favorite tools to use, no matter what it is, if it's like something specific to writing or something more specific to like social work and facilitating, is I'll usually have like a buddy. So earlier this year, I had someone and we showed up like twice a week and we were working in very different areas, but we were like each other's cheerleaders. We're like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm learning. This is what I want done in the next 2 weeks. And so we like minded with each other. Every 2 weeks, we would show up and do our little check-ins and our cheerleading. And it also made us feel brave, because I was like, if she wasn't there holding me accountable, there's a lot of those things I wouldn't have done, because I was like, oh, dang, now I open my mouth. And I think that's really important, is like building those types of support systems in if you don't have them. And, that's someone who I met once who lives like across the country. So I think there's a lot of people who are willing if you just ask them.
I love that. I love that. And just thinking about, sometimes someone will ask me to do something or build a workshop or build a session or something. And I think in my brain, okay, well, how can I repurpose this? I'll build this out for them, but how can I reuse it for myself? And then one thing that's really helped me in terms of how am I going to make some money as a writer is just, well, where is my energy? And also, how do I show up as my most like authentic self? What spaces? Like, what does that really look like? And like you said, Helen, I've made so many mistakes where I've tried things and I'm like, oh, why did I build this? Like, let me just delete it real quick. But as we get to know ourselves and as we look at our energy and all of those different things, like that's really how we curate almost like this ecosystem. And just from having a book in the world, like Jen, I don't know what this looks like for you, but you also write in multiple genres. So I've got poetry, fiction, nonfiction, a guided journal. Like, what's even going on? What's that one thing that connects everything? So I see that as like love and care. All the things I'm writing about, love and care is like always somehow coming out. How do I take that and monetize, that theme? That's going to align with my energy and my message. So I'm going to ask you about money and writing in multiple genres and all the good stuff. What are some things that you've thought about in terms of making money?
The wonderful thing about writing in multiple genres is that it diversifies. I sound like an investment banker, but it diversifies your portfolio, basically, is what I'm saying. So everyone's like, we didn't sign up for this, Jen. Come on, stop. But so like, for example, I have written children's nonfiction books, mostly for middle school readers. And those opportunities came about because Orca Books, my publisher, asked me to write them on specific topics. And then that kind of snowballed into doing, for example, Finding Home was the most recent one about the history of migration and refugees, which was a super rewarding book to write, and I really enjoyed it. But being able to write in multiple genres means that you're meeting new editors, new publishers, a whole new company, oftentimes. And that just spreads sort of like your area of money-making opportunity. And that I think is one of the best things that I ever did in terms of making money from my writing. The other thing, obviously we've all, you've taught a session. I used to teach at the Writers Studio at SFU, which I really liked. But I found while I was doing that, I think I did it for about 7 years, that as much as I liked the classroom work, what I really loved was working one-on-one with authors, or emerging authors. That to me was the best thing about that job. So then I thought, how am I going to do that, just that, and make money? Because it would be really great. So that's when I decided, okay, let me try editing, acquisitions and editing. And I started doing it sort of freelance with Woolsack and Wynn and Buck Writer Books, did a few of those books. I'm like, okay, great. Now I know I love it. So let me try to find another job. So then I started working at ECW, which was great. And I worked there half time. And I love this job. Like, I love it. But I think, further to your point, Chelene, is figuring out what part of the money-making stuff that we all do actually fills your cups as opposed to deleting it, depleting, not deleting, depleting them. So that's really, really important. And I would encourage everyone to like take some time to think about that.
Do a little self-reflection, because I think that's what also came up for me as well. Is I love working one-on-one with writers. It's just one person. I don't have to be over here with 30 different, like that doesn't suit me. Like I even decided, oh, okay, I'm going to be a literary agent. That lasted a couple of years, but it just didn't make sense for my personality at all. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to negotiate this. Can you just give them, the writers, what they like? It just didn't make sense for me. So paying attention to who you are, your energy levels, and what do you really enjoy doing as it connects to creativity in some way. So eye-opening. Thank you, Jen. Christina, what do you think about money and making money from having a book in the world?
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of the comments that have come before. And I think something that's been important for me, and I think that probably every writer has to wrestle with at some point, is like, what are the sort of writing adjacent activities that you enjoy, that fill your cup, all of those things. And which of those things do you want to do in collaboration with organizations that will organize on your behalf, and which can you do independently? And you might hate doing them independently. Most of my career, I was a journalist, so I wasn't organizing anything. I was showing up for work and doing my work, and somebody gave me a paycheck. When I left that work, I was lucky to be able to keep doing freelancing. And so my mindset as I was coming into books and publishing, and this sort of seems like a related industry to journalism, but it's actually, they're quite far apart, was my first focus was on just sort of doing things where there was a foundation already. So doing things with writing organizations, doing things with universities, where they'd be like, we're going to host the Zoom, we'll pay you X amount, can you come do this sort of thing? And it took me a really long time to sort of go, wait a minute, could I organize that myself? And secondarily, do I want to organize it myself, right? Those are sort of two different questions. And that's sort of a space that I'm in right now because, I would do, say, a workshop, and yeah, I know I've agreed to the workshop. I have to build the workshop. Often I love doing that because it's a material I can repurpose for something else later if someone comes along and they're not sure what they want to offer. And I can say, hey, here's a workshop I've already created. Do you want to do that? But then I'd show up to the workshop and there might be 80 people in that Zoom. They've all paid X amount, and I've been paid a flat rate to teach it. And when I add up the numbers, I go, somebody's making a big chunk in between here, which often is fine. Often the organization is sort of, a nonprofit kind of thing where you're happy to have, you're boosting their bottom line by doing this event and all of that. But sometimes it's an organization where you're like, you guys have a lot of money and I earned this amount. So what if I did this whole thing by myself and the fees that each person paid were even halved and then they paid me directly, right? So that's sort of, I think, a thing that a lot of writers have to come to is like, do I want to continue to rely on organizational capacity for other people to do things for me, which might be what works best for you, or do I have the time, energy, ability to start organizing these things on my own? And I've started doing a few of those things and I actually really like it because then I'm in control of all the pieces. I'm in control of the timing and when it happens. And yeah, is that scout night where I can't drive my kid to his scout meeting? I can work around those things, right? And so I think that's something around making money, is that there's two different paths there and you can do both or you can do one or the other, right? But yeah, you sort of have to figure out what's going to work for you in that way too.
Yeah. And the business side of it, like you kind of have to sell something. I
Yeah.
am not a salesperson. I don't want to sell anything. So I've learned that about myself. This is also why the agenting role didn't work for me because I have to sell things. Oh no. And so knowing what I know about myself, my personality, and my energy, and what's really important to me is like working one-on-one with people and saying, like, if this was helpful for you, could you tell someone else? Or tell someone else who might, be a good fit to work with me and spreading it organically that way. That I don't have to be that person on the highway, like throwing flyers at people because like I can't do it. And that doesn't feel fun and that doesn't feel energetic at that point. So all of this, just kind of knowing yourself and what's important to you as a creative. I love this. I think we opened the door to the money conversation, and I hope that we can have more really intimate talks about money and making money as creative. So now we're going to move on because I have so many questions, and we literally only have, I think, like 8 minutes, and then we're going to see if there's any audience questions. So here's something that I've been thinking about. Maybe we'll move into the process of writing. I'm always sharing with writers how I imagine each book that I write to be a real life person. Like it's out there, it's walking around, it's knocking on doors, and it's saying something. It's spreading a very specific message. So every book that I write now, I would say from book 3 onwards, has had an action. So how do you decide what you want your book to do in the world? Take a minute and think about this. And then I'll ask Helen first.
I would take that full minute
Take it.
me to like
Oh,
think
yeah.
about it. I feel like there's a relationship with story, like for me personally on this end, even before the story begins, like I have these like conversations. I don't know if it's like necessarily with story or whatever else, like creative energy. And I ask people, I'm like, can you feel that like when a story's around you, like it's like forming, or there's these thoughts forming, and your job is to sense like when it's ready, and then you like lasso it in and like bring it into the world. And so for me, it's knowing that like I really believe that, I'm here, but I'm also like a conduit type of thing. Like I just need to show up and do the work and trust that whatever's put me on this earth. So spirit plays a huge thing for me, a huge role. Will show up to make whatever I'm doing enough. And so, for example, the book that I'm writing, like I'll have these, I'm going to sound crazy as hell. like these conversations out loud where I'm like, all right, like this is how this book is gonna come out, and like, like thank you. Like I make these tall orders of being like, we're gonna do this by this season, and it's just gonna pour. And I can like, and I'll visualize that happening in terms of like me sitting down and this coming with ease and flow and trying to understand what that looks like. And then I know my job is to show up every day, which I haven't been doing for the past 2 weeks, but like to show up every day and just engage in that process. And it like truly is like a reciprocal relationship where like I'm trusting. Me opening up my laptop and sitting in front of that document is an act of trust. And if you're not engaging in that act of trust, then how is story supposed to show up for you if you're not showing up, right? If you're not taking that time. And that doesn't mean that you don't hit like some walls. It doesn't mean that there aren't some things that are like rough, and maybe things like shift and evolve, and it's like trusting that process as well, being able to be firm yet flexible when you need to be able to change things, but also to stick through things. And so I feel like sometimes that story will let you know how it wants to show up and how it wants to be in this world. Because like now I'm writing a travel romance, and for me it's like there's gonna be lots of sex. Like I'm really happy about that. And like love and like more fluffy things. Obviously some like deep thoughts, but it's gonna be a little bit different. And I'm excited for, I guess, like different content, because I've written in really hard spaces before. To be able to write into a new space is kind of exciting.
Mm. I'm looking forward to this travel romance, I have to say. And you should talk to Jen about how to write the sex scene. I remember your topic on, I was like, Jen knows everything. I still have the handouts. I still have the handouts. And eventually I'm going to have to write one of those scenes. I'm terrified, but yeah.
That's actually one of the things one of the first things I did to try to make money is I pitched that session
Oh,
to UBC continuing studies, I think, and they let me run it.
ooh,
And then I keep just reteaching it. There's just,
that's awesome.
yeah, the main message is, if you want like the short version, is there are no good names for certain body parts. There just are no good words for them. So just don't use an elbow. Ears are good, whatever. I was just gonna say, I'll be real quick here about like how you know what the purpose of your book is. Like for me, it's a very different thing from like the idea or the premise of your book, because the premise can
Yeah,
almost be anything.
that's right.
I usually take the time at some point, I want to say draft 3-ish, to read through it, because sometimes you don't know what the point of the book is until you start writing it, as Helen was saying. And so around draft 3, I read the book and I'm like, what is becoming apparent to me or visible to me about what the purpose of this book is in the world. And then once I figure that out, I actually do write it as a header in my Word document so that it's always visible, because I think that it's really important to make sure that everything that you're writing is in service to this purpose, and whatever it is. So like, for example, for me, for Superfan, the purpose for that book for me was to have people start thinking more deeply about the choices they make when they're consuming culture, because I think a lot of people are not quite ready to think really deeply about really like politics, for example, or social issues, or that can seem daunting. But everybody consumes culture, and if we start questioning and interrogating why we're consuming the culture, that's going to lead you to understanding yourself better and other people better. And it's going to lead you down a road to politics. It's going to lead you down a road to social decisions, whatever it is. And that was my purpose for it. And that was something that I figured out, yeah, around draft 3. And it became
Yeah,
a real motivating factor for me.
beautiful.
If I
And I
could
love
just,
that you said draft 3. Like it's not right away. It's not immediate.
Oh my God, no, nothing is immediate.
Yes. Christina, I think you were saying something.
yeah, I was just going to jump in and say what a great
Yeah.
tip that is to do that on a book level. Like, what is the heart of this? What is this about? And have that at the top. I used to do that when I was still working in newspapers, where I'd come back to the office and I'd put a little sticky sometimes at the top of my screen, like, okay, not what is the lead, not who are the characters, who are the people, what are the quotes, but I would have a little sticky that was like, what is the what am I actually writing about here? Right? Like, what is the thing that is the heart of this? And I, get halfway through the quotes and copying them down, and all of a sudden I'm like, these quotes don't really refer back to the heart of this. So, anyways, I just had to jump in
Mm,
and say, I've never thought about doing that kind of on that book level, but it makes so much sense. That's a great idea.
yeah, I like that because if you ask yourself, like, what do I want this book to do? I think it's also a great way to kind of track or mark your own success, right? Then you're kind of following that. You're like, is my book, once it's written, is my book out there in the world doing this thing that I want it to do? It helps you stay on your own path and kind of define success for yourself because you're like, this is what I figured out with my novel, Junie, which won some things, it did some things, but is it successful to me? If I know what I wanted this book to do in the world and I don't feel like it really did that, that might lead me to write this other novel, which is where the other novel came from, because I still have more stuff to say. I wasn't able to put it all in that book. So all those things, I think, I think that's a really exciting way to look at the creative process. Okay, I'm going to check the time, 4:30. So we are going to move into audience questions, which I think there are a few. There are. Okay. So I'm going to ask these questions, and whoever feels like answering them, you don't all three have to answer them. The first question is, how do you decide what amount of speaker fee to accept? Ooh, this is a good one because I don't know the answer to this. Do you stick with the Writers Union guidelines as a minimum? If so, how long was it after your first book that you started requesting the Writers Union minimum fee? Who wants to tackle this?
Um, that's a great question. But you should always ask for the minimum fee from the Writers Union. Doesn't matter if it's your first book or not. Always at the bare minimum, ask for the minimum. I would say for you to decide what your speaker fee is going to be, you have to think about all the time you're going to spend before, during, and after, and then multiply that by how much you want to make per hour. And it might be exorbitant. It might turn out to be a really big, but that's going to be what the cost of it is going to be for you. And then you have to figure out if you're actually going to ask for that, because sometimes the organization will not be able to afford it. A lot of them are not for profit. A lot of them don't have a lot of money, and some organizations will. So I love asking for exorbitant speaker fees from universities. That's my favorite thing to do. You can say anything and they'll almost say yes.
Hot tip, hot off the press. And that's a really good point because I think, we don't think about the before, the after, and all those different things. But when it comes to asking for a specific amount of money, I think it's really important to pay attention to all those factors because you're not just showing up on the day of. There's a lot of different things that are involved. So, hot tip from Jen. Cool. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that before I go to another audience question? No? Cool. Okay, good. Okay, so here's another question. Do you still think traditional publishing is worthwhile these days versus choosing the indie author route?
I do not have anything like indie author route based, but I think of like what Christina said when she said, do you want someone to handle these things or do you want to handle these things? And I think sometimes it's like that measure of work too, like in terms of I remember watching because the same year my book came out, my first book, and I was with like a small publisher. I was with the University of Regina Press, which is like not even like it was a small publisher. And but my friend Elaine Alec, her book Calling My Spirit Back came out the same year, and she self-published, which was like crazy to watch her. And she like worked herself into like large bookstores, places all over the place, and it complements the work that she does now. And she's working on her second book, but she put a lot of hustle into it. Like I remember her talking about the media manager she had that queued her up when she needed to engage with her like IG audience, like at what times, what to post, when to go live. Like that's busy. Like that's a lot of effort in terms of like building an audience, connecting with people. That's a lot of work that I'm like, I can't put that in because I'll do good for like 2 weeks and I'll be like, nah. So I think for me, like I think about the access that publishers and like lit agents and those types of things that they have and what they handle and what that trade-off is for me in terms of like specific freedoms or whatever that looks like. I don't know if I'm actually answering that question, so maybe like Jen or Christina want to hop in on that one.
Yeah, I think you nailed what my same answer would be, and it does go back to like how much can you do on your own versus how much do you want to do on your own. And there's still this, I think, this persistent myth that there's sort of endless money for publicity even when you are with traditional publishing, which it's not sort of the 70s and the 80s. There isn't endless. There's still tons of footwork that you do as an author with a traditional publisher, no matter what. But there's way less than if you're independently publishing. And so, like I was at a festival last month, and one of the questions people wanted to ask me was like, how do you deal with this kind of ISBN when you're doing a second edition? I was like, I have no idea, and I don't really want to know. And maybe a project will come down the tubes for me someday where I'm like, it's worth it for me to know. I'm going to figure out how to do this. I want to independently publish this. But the value that I get from being able to not think about that, and have somebody at the publisher sort all of that out and figure out who's going to design the cover, like that's valuable to me. The trade-off is you wait longer or it takes more time, or that sort of thing. So I think I've seen tons of people have amazing success in indie publishing, and I would never ever discourage someone from doing it. But I know for me at this stage in my life, with the other commitments that are going on, I don't want to know how to do an ISBN. I want someone to do that for me. Absolutely. So yeah.
Let me just say, because I work for a traditional publisher, and I will say that if it's a decision that you're wrestling with, you have to think about what your goal is for your book. Where do you want your book to go? Who do you want to read it? For general trade, and by general trade, I mean just general interest books, it's really difficult for independently published authors to do that. It's hard to do. And just to but if you're writing something that is like an intimate story that you want your friends and family and like whatever, and you want to see what else happens, that's great. You can do it that way. I will say that one of the first things I learned about traditional publishing when I started working and looking at the budgets is that the investment that a traditional publisher in Canada will put into a book is roughly in the price range of $50,000 to $80,000. That's how much money it takes for us to take a book to market with about 3,000 copies. Okay. Print copies. And so that includes your publicity, that includes the person who goes to the Library Association and pushes your book onto the librarians, that includes design, production, all of that. So if you want your book to reach 3,000 readers, that's what the ballpark might be. Okay, so then that's something that I think people have to know. That's a very opaque thing. A lot of people don't know that. That's how much money is spent. As an editor myself, I will spend editing a book before it goes to press somewhere in the range, depending on the book, between 100 and 200 hours. That's really valuable stuff you get from a traditional publisher, just saying.
And it's so nice, you get an email, someone says, send us this at this time. And you're like, okay. When it comes down to design, listen, if you leave me in charge of this, it's just going to be a picture of my dog on the cover on every book that I write. So you have this design team and there's all this thought put behind it, and it's really expensive. But it's a big investment to say, hey, we're going to take this idea, this manuscript, and we're going to put it into book form. There's so many things that happen. I think with my second book, I was just blown away. I'm like, all these people are doing all these things. It's not just
I will
here's this
say,
advance.
I do know how to get an ISBN, so you can ask me.
Ask Jen. Write your sex scene and get the ISBN. Just come to Jen. You are golden. I love it. Okay. We have 6 minutes. I want to ask this question. How do you find new ideas and decide what you want your next book to be about?
I'll jump in right off the bat. I love this question because I think, how do you find book ideas? For me, I often think I don't have enough life to write all of the ideas that the whole world is like what ifs. The whole world is strangers having a conversation that make me wonder what they're having a conversation about, or what if XYZ happened and aliens landed tomorrow, right? I feel like there's so almost sort of more ideas than I have time for. And I think that we're all like that. They come and go so quickly. One of the things I do really consistently is when I have an idea, the tiniest little spark of an idea. And I was just looking at these this afternoon. I text it to myself if I'm out and about. And then I have a book, big ideas, small notes on big ideas. And each page is like another story idea. And they're all across, there's so many different genres in this book. I'll never get to all of them. But if I have another idea that relates to that particular book, I'll go back to that page and write it in. It's a way for me to keep track of ideas because I don't want to get sidetracked by a new shiny thing when I'm working on the last shiny thing. Um, and how do I decide what to work on next is I think the thing that's speaking the biggest, but also I think, and Helen sort of referred to this a little bit before about like my last book required a lot of emotional delving into messy family stuff and identity and body junk and image and all sorts of things, right? And I'm like, I can't do that a second time back to back. So my first novel was a novel. It was a little bit lighter. It was sort of a little bit romancy. So the next thing that I'm working on now is like a disastery kind of story. And the thing after that might go back to nonfiction. And I think some people stick in one genre and they can do it over and over again. And I think most of us need the break of creativity into something else, especially if we're writing heavy personal memoir. We need to step back. So, yeah, I don't know how well that answers the question, but yeah, that's what I think. The ideas are just everywhere, but they come into our brain when we're in the shower and we forget about them. So, if you can find a way to harness them, write them down, you'll probably feel like, oh, I have more ideas than I can ever get to.
And they always come in the shower. Like that's where all the ideas are. I have like dry erase pens in my bathroom, and then my partner has to go in and be like, "What is she writing? Like, what's on the mirror?" It's all these random notes because I'm like, I can't lose this, so I'll run out and just write it on the mirror and then go back to my shower. But I love that you said it's just like possibility. You've got this notebook filled up with ideas that you may never get to, because I think some writers have that fear of running out of ideas. I'm like, I can write about all kinds of things. I don't know if they're books, but I have ideas. Jen, what about you? How do you write?
I get ideas from everywhere. I get the walking the dog. Thank God for the notes app on my phone. But like I've had ideas that went nowhere. I once had an idea to write like a comedic novel about a fire at a clown college. It's not gonna happen. But like I literally had this idea and I'm like, it's so funny though. And because they're all packed into a tiny fire truck and they all come out, and there's the one guy with the corsage and the water comes spurting out of it. I'm like, it's hilarious. Anyway, it's never going to happen. But most of my like really good ideas, the ones that end up working out, are ones that have some kind of an emotional connection with me or my life or my family or whatever. So I have a horror novel coming out next year, and that is actually came about because when my son was little and I was living alone with him, I would wake up in the morning, I'd be like, God, I'm so tired. I don't remember a damn thing I did yesterday. Like, and there's still like a million things left to do. I really wish someone would come overnight and like just do all the stuff that I left undone. So then the horror novel is basically a tired single mom who wakes up one morning and all the stuff is done, but who is doing it is the question. And what does that person or entity want in exchange? So that's
I need to read that. And when is that coming out, Jen? When is this coming
next
out?
fall, September.
Around the corner, really. But I really look forward to that. That sounds incredibly interesting. Helen, I gotta hear from you. How do your new book ideas take shape?
Yeah, so last winter, I think it was December, I had a dream, and if anybody's read any of my books, they know like I like live and make decisions by dreams. That's how my people were. But this dream was like, in 7 months, like you're going to die. And I remember like freaking out. And so I like marked it on my calendar and I was like, okay, this is 7 months. And like even with my son, I was like, sorry, but you're not allowed to do anything drastic like on this date or around this date. Like I'm not traveling, I'm staying home. Really just like prepared for things. And I was like, but like right after that, I had a dream about like birth, and it was like, you're pregnant, you're old and pregnant. And I was like, oh no, which was more devastating than the death dream. I was like, no. And so I was like, okay, well, that's death and birth, like back to back. And I'm like, so something's going to happen. I don't know what it is. Like, we'll just wait and see. Like, it's going to be a shift. And so I was at home on this like death birthday, like just like lounging around. Like you see that meme of like the guy from Narcos where he's like just like looking at things. So I'm like, okay, I'm just home for the day, like anticipating whatever this change is. And I remember that day just being like, oh, well, I had this like thought, and it was just like this thought of this person. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna let myself be curious because I'm home all day. Like, I'm not doing anything. I'm gonna just give myself permission to be curious and sit with this. And that's when I started writing this book that I'm working on. And it wasn't even like premeditated. It was just like having a thought and allowing myself to be curious to see if anything was there. And I think within like the first like 2-3 weeks, like it was like the first 30 pages, and it was like, okay, like I'm gonna sit with this. I can see this, and I can spend time with this person, and I can see their journey unfolding, and this is what I'm writing. So that one happened on that day, and I was like, maybe, and that was it. Like that was the shift and the change, because that one is also a single mom or single mom. Yeah. It's like navigating so much stuff, but it happened on that day. And I think that curiosity piece to see, like we sit with things so long sometimes without ever starting. And I think that piece is huge, because I do have another book that I'm writing, and it's historical fiction. That one's going to take me a long time. Like that one's literary fiction. There's a lot of research, a lot of like language pieces that need to go into it. That one is like 3-4 years down the road. Like I'll be done that. But right now, let me work on this because it came like really, really fast. So I think sometimes just answering and letting yourself be curious, also knowing sometimes and building that discernment of like, maybe there's not a book here. Maybe it's just something. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Follow the thread of curiosity, folks. That is the message. That is the takeaway. I want to thank all of you so much for this beautiful conversation, Helen, Jen, Christina. This has been nourishing for me. I feel like I could do some cartwheels now. And I don't know how to do cartwheels, but I want to thank you all so much for being so open and for sharing, and for all of you in the audience for hanging out with us. Thank you so much. And this has been great. I feel like I can go work on my novel after this, after my nap, that is. So thank you all so much. And I guess Keegan is going to come back up on stage and say a few things. But before we go, yeah, thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Chelene. So yes, I am thanking everyone once again, especially the attendees and the moderator and authors, Chelene Knight, Helen Knott, Jen Sookfong Lee, and Christina Myers. Thank you for sharing all your tidbits of wisdom and personal experiences in this industry. If you are interested in purchasing any of the books featured today, please support festival sponsor and BFA bookseller Monroe Books. You can find the books featured during the festival in-store and online at monroebooks.com. And as a bonus for attending today, books featured at the panel will be 20% off at Monroe's with the promo code VFA2024. There are more events tonight and tomorrow, so please visit our website, victoriafestivalofauthors.ca, to view our festival program. This year, most festival events are available online. Our website also features Q&As with all the authors participating in the VFA 2024. As well, you can sign up for our newsletter. If you would like to support the festival in another way, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram and encourage your friends to attend one of our upcoming events. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or at the VFA page at Canada Helps. Your donation helps keep the VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you at our next Zoom event, which is Memoirists Unite, a conversation with debut memoir writers, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific. This event is curated by Danny Ramadan and features authors Cody Cutano, Jen Sookfong Lee, and Maurice Villacoupe. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.